Welcome to the Sacred Thread podcast, where we explore spirituality, psychology, and the deeper questions of what it means to be human. I'm your host, Winston Janis. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sacred Thread podcast. Today, I'm joined by Cathie Caimano, an Episcopal priest, writer, and runner who's reimagining what church can look like in today's world. She writes the Free Range Priest newsletter on Substack, created Trexo, a gym for your soul, and recently is launching Substack Seminary, which I'm excited to talk to her about, a space exploring how faith and community can take new forms beyond traditional walls. So thanks for joining me, Cathie.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, I'm very excited. As we were talking a little bit before, I have a background in ministry. I was an associate pastor for a little while in the United Church of Christ, and walked away from ministry. Now I'm full-time to be a therapist and kind of doing these kind of things on the side. And I was always talking I was the associate pastor of the senior pastor. We were always talking about the future of the church and very passionate about, okay, what's coming around the corner, and studying like the emerging church movement and all of that. And it really sounds like that's something you're passionate about as well. I guess I'm curious just to ask a little bit about, maybe you could tell our listeners about your background, and what led you up to this point. If that's not too big of a question.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a really big question. I will try to skip through all the things. I'm an Episcopal priest. I've been ordained for 25 years now, and I'd like to say that I went to seminary in New York City in the 1990s. I actually graduated in 1999, and I was ordained in January 2000. Which I love for
Wow.
one reason, because I'm not very good at math and I never have to worry about how long I've been ordained, because whatever year it is, that's how long I've been ordained.
Hmm.
But I think that part of that, part of the import for that for me is I was fully formed and fully trained in the institutional model of the church, the what I call the mid 20th century organizational and administrative model of the church. And when I went to seminary, all of us were basically formed very well, I think, to serve that church. And I never had any inkling that the church would look any different, or that there was real struggles, if you will, with the model and the organizational and the hierarchical stuff that were already showing cracks, right? By the mid 90s, in the late 90s, and the turn of the century, the church was already declining significantly. And then I got out into the world of the church, serving the church, thinking, I'm just going to serve one congregation after another, and it's all going to be good and happy. And almost immediately, I ran into the kinds of issues that I think are plaguing the church today on the denominational organizational level, things like dwindling memberships, things like aging parishioners, things like aging buildings, things like a really high level of programmatic administrative stuff that churches have to deal with, even if they're tiny churches, because it's the model in our head, and the whole father knows best pastoral style, where the clergy person's in charge and it's their job basically to be the CEO of a small nonprofit. And basically, how that model was no longer working really. And it was causing all sorts of stress and problems, I think, for clergy and for congregations. And it was kind of getting in the way of those of us in Christian community, actually sharing the gospel, right? Like actually following our callings and actually helping people grow in their relationship with God. And so I served three different churches, and then I served on the staff of the Bishop of North Carolina. And in that role, I was what's called a regional canon. A canon is someone who serves on a bishop's staff. And I did serve for Bishop Michael Curry, who went on to become the head of the whole Episcopal Church and is just a
Wow.
beloved and wonderful person. And he was the Bishop of North Carolina at that time. And I learned so much from him. But also, as a regional canon, my job was in the eastern part of our diocese, which isn't the whole eastern part of North Carolina, but it's a lot of the eastern part of North Carolina. I was in charge of being congregational support and clergy, congregational development and clergy support for 60 congregations and the clergy that serve them. Most of these 60 congregations are fewer than 25 people at that time. And this was 10 or 11 years ago. And some of them are larger. But in that role, I began to see that every church, and I mean every church, and I don't believe it if people say my church is an exception. Every church is dealing with these same issues, the systematic changes that are causing this model to be so heavy and hard for us to actually do ministry in. And I'm not saying some churches aren't thriving, but we can see for the numbers that our numbers are plummeting. In the Episcopal Church, our numbers are plummeting. And for
Mm,
most denominational churches, the numbers are plummeting. And basically what we're seeing is that it's just not working anymore. We're not being effective as the church in terms of sharing the gospel and and creating disciples. And I do think it's a systematic and or structural thing that is causing the problem. So when Bishop Curry was elected to be the presiding bishop, I just decided it was time, right? I was just gonna figure this out. He's the one who gave me the name free range priest, he and my
oh,
husband. And then I don't know what possessed me. It was the same thing as getting my calling when I was in college. I had no idea what it's going to look like, but I just was like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out how we are the church into the future, getting out from under what I call it cage-free ministry because free range, right? And so,
right.
or like, not which is not necessarily leaving the tradition behind, not at all. Like I am a very traditional person, and I very much believe in hierarchical church, and believe in bishops, and I believe in church authority and all of that. So I'm not talking
Mm,
about the faith itself. I'm talking about this. Again, it's like IBM, right? It's like we work for IBM. It's like these big organizational models that are just not working anymore, and it's crushing the church. And how could we do ministry? How could we be church? Um, outside that model or alongside that model, right? And so that's where that journey started, and that's been 10 years now. And the pandemic was like, for a while I was just kind of like wandering around. I was doing a lot of digital ministry and doing a lot of like consulting and basically just talking to people. I spent a lot of time getting the pension fund to recognize my ministry, which I did. So that was one of
good for
those really
you.
big moments for
Yeah.
me. I still pay into my own pension. I'm less than 4 years to retirement, but I still free range priest pays into my pension fund, so that's a whole other story. And
Nice.
I also trademarked the term free range priest. So
Ah.
you really can't call yourself a free range priest unless you're asked my permission. I'm wearing
Okay,
my free range
noted.
priest t-shirt. I
Noted.
don't know if you can see it. Yes. And then when the pandemic happened, there was a huge shift. It's so many huge shifts, right? The whole world shifted. We're still coming out from underneath that. But I think two really big things happened. One, all of a sudden my phone did not stop ringing for a year because all of a sudden people wanted to be on Zoom. They wanted to know how to do digital ministry. They wanted to know how to do their, stream their services. Churches started to see that they had to do digital ministry. And my ministry is not entirely about digital ministry, but I do think that part of the future of church is that ministry needs to be technology based, just like business, just like medicine, just like the law, just like everything else needs to be technology based. And I think we're way behind the eight ball on that one. But my phone did not stop ringing. And then I think churches open themselves up to this idea that they really do have to, like we have to be in the digital world and use digital tools to share the gospel. After the pandemic, a lot of churches kind of receded, right? Like went right back to like we're going to soon do in-person worship and we're not going to deal with this anymore. But I think it opened up both the creativity of ministers and some congregations, lay and ordained ministers, to see how it could actually be done, that we can actually form community, share the gospel, share the faith, those sorts of things. And I think that in the rest of the world, digital tools and also organizational tools, things like Substack, things like online community builders, started to just really become amazingly easy to use, inexpensive. You don't have to be a computer programmer anymore to be able to put together these kind of newsletters and email lists and ways to form community. And all of that is sort of converging now into a world in which there are, I'm not the only free range priest. I'm the only one who calls myself a free range priest, but there's many, 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 many ministers who are out there. You are an example. Like, I think that I don't know a minister anymore who does not have a side gig, if you will, who a blog, a podcast, a newsletter, a book, speaking, running retreats, doing things like that. And to me, this is what the future of church is starting to look like, right? We've busted out of the walls of the church. And so what we're learning to do now is translate the faith from that one model that church looks like, going to a building on Sunday, worshiping and partaking in programs that are all, if you will, in-house in one congregation led by one, maybe two pastors. And everybody gets their spiritual formation, worship, and community all in one place, to a world that is much more dispersed, much more agile, much more networked. And people get they get their Christian formation, they get their worship, they get their community, maybe in a whole lot of different places, right? None of which might be a traditional church. Some of it might be traditional church. So that's the long answer, starting from when I got ordained. But I feel like I'm in this beautiful place where I am deeply steeped in the 20th century organizational process and in the ancient traditions of the faith. And I just happen to be ordained into the church, into the world, right on the cusp of this kind of digital revolution and this kind of like church revolution, that I guess I just was young enough and interested enough that I was able to sort of catch that wave as well. And now I kind of feel like my ministry is, how do we weave those things together? Right? Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't want to, I am the pastor of a small traditional congregational church that has 30 members in a small town in North Carolina that I love. Um, they are also on the church chat that I built for them. And I don't feel like I'm rejecting the institution, but I am saying, look, we can move into the future, both as the institution and as individual ministers.
Yeah, you're the bridge, right?
Yeah, I mean, that seems a little that seems a little scary, but I am a bridge. I always say, like, I feel like I do have this thread of the tapestry that is being woven, right? I do believe that. I believe that that is my calling. I don't think it's the only thread, right? I don't think I am the bridge, but I think that I will say that in this course of the last decade, I feel like I'm having conversations that I don't think a whole lot of other people are having. Right. And so 10 years ago, I felt like I was maybe the only one, maybe just one of a handful. Now I feel like those conversations are happening more and more and more. Right. And
Mhm.
so there are other threads out there. Yeah, I don't think I'm not that special, but I do feel like it's important to talk about these things and to open up. I think it's taken a long time. People are always saying, like, what do you do again? Like, what exactly do you do?
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, I just kind of poke at these things, right? I kind of experiment with, well, how could we do this differently? Right? So how could we um well, like, I'm trying to think of a good example. One of them is this concept of like churches being silos, right? And like, you go to one church and you belong to that church and you don't leave that church unless there's a problem, right? Or you die or you move somewhere else.
Right.
And you see, intrinsically, we see other churches as competition, right? And you only go to
Mm.
your own brand of church, right? Which I think is just not true anymore. But that's like this sort of mindset that I feel like we can get out of. So, for instance, my small church that I serve, it's on this city block and is on half of a city block in this small town. And the other half of the city block was just recently bought by another church. And my church is an Episcopal church. That church is gonna be a non-denominational church. It is likely to be much bigger than ours just from the beginning. And I think there's a way that we could, and some of us were kind of like, oh my God, this is scary. What are those people going to do on our property, kind of thing. And but then immediately we kind of turned and said, wow, like, what is the Holy Spirit doing here? Like, how we now have a whole block of church, right? How can we're all on the same team, right? How can we be partners in sharing the gospel? What would it look like if we we're friends and neighbors and supportive of each other's ministry. And to me,
Mm,
that's the mindset change, right? That's getting out of the old, like if you're not on our team, like, then we don't have anything to do with you, or you're not like us. And so you might be doing it wrong, or you might believe things that we don't believe, or that kind of thing. And we might lose members to them, or they might lose members to us, to like, what does it look like for all of us to be in ministry on the same block, right? What's God doing here, and how are we called to serve one another, right? And to hold up, what we have, but also share it with other people. So that's just a tiny example of what I'm talking about looking at it differently. And some of it feels scary, but none of it is very very unusual, I would say. It's just like, I think that we're so locked in, especially if you belong to a denominational institutional church, to like this like imprinted mindset of what church and congregations and ministry is and should be and could be, that we don't even ask ourselves the questions of, what if we did live in partnership with the non-denominational church that's on the other side of our block?
mm.
That kind of thing. So anyway.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. Well, yeah, being in relationship with one another in a more kind of, yeah, it is true. I think it's the model's not great with the silos. It's like, every church is only on Sundays, it seems. I know it's not actually fully
Right.
accurate, right? But the main services are on
Mostly.
Sundays, and
Yeah.
and so people have a hard time. Okay, you got to wait an entire week to visit different
Right.
churches. People who, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a pastor, and he's like, if we want to see, you can't, you have to stick with your own, you're working at your church. You can't really see how other people are really doing it and experience that.
Right.
It's the
Right.
model, it limits us and holds us back. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other thing. I'm really big into what I call sustainable part-time ministry, which is I serve very part-time at the congregation that I serve, even though I'm like so fully connected with these people. Like I feel like we spend a lot of time together, partially because we have a church chat group, and so we are constantly in conversation. But I'm only there 2 Sundays a month, and I fully believe very strongly that if you're in part-time ministry, you must be there at most 2 Sundays a month, because most people spend most of their time in church on Sunday. If you are at that church every Sunday, then you are de facto a full-time priest, right? And A, it's too much work, but B, I think that part of part-time ministry, and I think part of ministry in general as clergy, is supporting the ministry of the congregation, not doing it for them, right? And so I think it supports their leadership of their own religious community. But
Mm.
yes, I'm also not there. I probably spend like 10 hours a month with them, actually in person, right? But we chat all the time. We're on Facebook all the time. I just changed their website to Substack. So if you go to stpaulsalisbury.org, you will go to a Substack page. And so we have like a highly interactive, not just a newsletter, but I put up my sermon, and we're doing these things about the spiritual practices of the congregation. And I am developing Trexo, these spiritual exercises with them. And so you can access that through their Substack as well. And because part of that too is like, how are they sharing ministry with people who are not physically present with them, right? Like, not just the newsletter that says, oh, we had taco fiesta, which we just had taco fiesta at our church, and we did just share some pictures of that, but truly, how are we growing in our faith, and how are we sharing the gospel with people who might be reading this newsletter, right? Who want to feel connected to our community and feel more connected with God. And so to look at it that way, like truly evangelism. So like breaking down some of those walls, right? Like our newsletter is not just for the 30 people who go to St. Paul's. It is for, and we already have like, it's only 2 weeks old, and we already have like 15 new subscribers. And so it's awesome. So people are joining us in that community. And that is presumably one thread of other people's spiritual lives, right? So maybe the 15 people who are reading the newsletter who don't go to St. Paul's, maybe they go to their own church. Maybe they don't go to their own church. Maybe they read different newsletters. Maybe they read spiritual books. Maybe they have a spiritual director. I don't know. But this idea that we can be formed in the Christian faith through multiple different ways, and multiple different communities, and that also I don't think should be strange. And I think it should be encouraged that these kind of communities are not our church communities do not have to be this kind of literal like closed door, like everybody's in here and you just belong to us, you don't belong anywhere else. Um, I'm not sure that I think that that's the best thing for the church.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, so what is this? I guess, because the Substack Seminary is the new project where it seems like you're kind of
Yeah.
bringing some organizational framework paradigm to this of how do you
Yeah.
do this in a organized, structured way to or assist people who are kind of on this path or trying to figure it out. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because like you said, when you talk about okay, a lot of people are doing podcasts or having newsletters, um, but yeah, it can feel maybe a little disorganized. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Maybe that's just
Hmm.
the chaoticness
Yeah.
of the spirit sometimes, right? But yeah,
True.
I'm just kind of curious to hear even more about what you're envisioning. What's the next step with the Substack Seminary and how that works, and yeah, whatever.
Ah, thank you. First of all, I do have to say, and again, it's so interesting with Substack. So I was talking with, do you know Lauren Richmond Jr., who also does a podcast called Future Christian? Do
Only
you know him?
through you.
Yeah, gotcha.
So
Well, he invited me on his podcast. I met him in Substack, and we were just talking. We just so hit it off when we did the podcast interview that we kept talking. And because he's also a cage-free minister, right? He's a chaplain. He also works with various congregations. He does consulting. He produces podcasts for other people. So he basically cobbles together a ministry through with multiple different kinds of ministry, but it's one thing. And so we were like, how can we like create like a community and how can we help support other people who are doing this and help them sort of like find their way through and also kind of have a networking group and also and then I mean I swear in the middle of the night I actually sent him a text like sometime in the I woke up and I was just like Substack Seminary, that's what we're going to call it. And I went running to my computer to make sure that the domain name wasn't taken. And I started the Substack and bought the domain name like, before I'd even had the complete thought about it, because I was like, "This is a great idea."
that's the
And not even
spirit.
was it and I wrote a note about it on Substack. I like, just like, "I'm thinking about doing this. Actually, I'm more than thinking about it, I'm doing it." And that became my only actual, like, viral note. Like, the last time I checked it I mean, normally, I write a note and, like, maybe 5 people like it, and maybe nobody likes it,
Yeah.
just kind of that's how Substack is. But this note has gotten last time I checked, it was, like, over 300 likes, over 50 comments, over 25,000 impressions. Like, it just went completely viral. And I personally went over 1,000 subscribers on Free Range Priest in a matter of 2 weeks just from this note. And I'm like,
Wow.
ooh, I hit a nerve. Like, this is it, right? This is it. Like, people
Mm.
are interested in this. And so the idea around it is this little tagline is let's build the future of church together. So I think of it as so it's a 12-month workshop, right? So subscribe for a year as on the founder level of Substack. And in 4 sort of quarters of let's look at your ministry like it's the project of the seminary, it's not a typical seminary, right? Is to for you the person who's participating to create a roadmap of your own ministry. Like, what are you doing if you have all these disparate pieces? How do they go together and form your own ministry? And what are you doing? What are you called to? So and also you can play even if you are full-time congregational minister, I like to say, because I think part of the mindset shift is um, even if you're a full-time minister in a congregation, that's what you do, right? You don't have a side gig, all of that kind of stuff. I still think there's this sense, especially in today's world, where you have a ministry, right? So people say, well, my ministry is I'm the head pastor of this church. But in this day and age, again, you still have a digital ministry presence. You still have people who are looking at your sermons, that kind of thing. And you are not going to be at that church forever, right? So to me, it's this idea of saying, like, what is it that I do, right? And what is it that I bring? And who am I, right, as a minister in this world? And then how am I in that relationship with this one congregation right now? But that's not my whole ministry. When I leave that congregation, I still have a ministry, right? And so this, and even like in the very tiny practical sense of, I was just talking to somebody who was struggling with like, what do I use for an email address, right? Do I use the church's email address? Then when I leave the church, then I lose my email address. And what about the emails that are mine and all that kind of stuff? And I'm like, here's what you do. You create a ministry of your own, right? You create an LLC and you get your own domain name and all of that kind of stuff. And you get your own email for that. And even if you're getting paid through the kind of regular channels as you get paid in a denominational ministry, use that email. Use your own email. And then whatever, you sort out if you have sensitive emails, what you do with those when you leave the church. But like that idea of boundaries and identity of your own ministry outside of the ministry of the church and alongside of the ministry of the church. So that's one of the things I'm talking about. So the big idea of Substack Seminary is be with us for a year and together, and I'm going to do it too. Lauren's going to do it too. And we're going to create our own roadmaps and just the big picture of what are we doing? So if I do have this and this and this and this and this, what does that add up to? And it's not just identity. The other really big part of it that is the big elephant in the room is money, right? It is,
Mhm.
how does this become sustainable, right? Um, we know the numbers. We should know the numbers. Um, Half, and I'm going to just go out on a limb and say more than half of clergy work less than full time because there aren't jobs for clergy. Like half of congregations, or at this point, a little bit more than half of congregations, cannot afford full time ministry, even if they wanted full time ministry. So, more and more clergy and lay ministers need to be able to pay their bills, right? And what typically happens, I think, in the system is that you get part-time pastors, and I put that in little quotation marks with my fingers for people who aren't seeing this on the screen, um, are working full time and getting paid half time, right, or less, and that's crazy, and it's killing them, and it also precludes them from working in ministry in other ways. And
Mhm.
so, new venues and new areas of ministry also mean new income streams, right? New ways to make a living in ministry. And I say this often, but I will say it here again. Bivocational is my trigger word. I go absolutely ballistic when people say bivocational. Not bivocational like you are, right? Like I am a therapist and I am a minister, right? I am equally called into two different areas. But when we say bivocational, when what we actually mean is you're not getting paid for your ministry, that just like makes me see red. That is wrong. There are no other professionals in this world, um, even non-professionals, you do work, you get paid for that work. The laborer deserves to be paid. Jesus said that, right? Incidentally, right? And so, but somehow ministers are expected to be happy that we're doing this. And I am very happy I'm a priest, but we're supposed to be happy we're doing this. And then what? Like have to work another full-time job in order to pay our bills, or, you know, rely on our spouse, which I do a lot of.
Yeah.
But so there is something deeply wrong with that system. So that's also part of it. How to create your own ministry identity in terms of how you are sharing the gospel and how you're bringing people more fully into their relationship with God. And how does that work for you in terms of your time, your effort, and your compensation so that you can have a ministry that is full time, whether you serve a congregation full time or not. And also, the church is getting more and more unstable, right? And so it is collapsing. And so we are closing so many churches, and I can't remember the number, but a large number of churches, every time they transition over to a new pastor, full time goes to half time, or it goes to three-quarters time or something like that. And
Mhm.
I know I hear stories every day of pastors who um get fired, or just lose their jobs because they don't even know, and all of a sudden the board comes in and says, well, we didn't make our budget, so bye, right? And that's the other thing about sort of what I would call entrepreneurial or clergypreneurial ministry, is that people feel like it feels very uncertain, and it can, just like any other small business or any other entrepreneurial venture, it can be very scary in some ways, like you don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. On the other hand, I would say you're building a base of your ministry, because then if you do get the axe at your congregational job, you're not left with nothing, right? Or you're not left with having to
Yeah.
relocate to the other side of the country for a job that's going to pay you $40,000 and uproot your kids from school and that kind of thing. So part of that is protective for ministers and ministry, because I think that yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think denominations have done the best job in the world protecting clergy in that sense.
Yeah, it's just it makes me think of my own story so much. It's like, okay, and I'm sure this is the case for a lot of people, but it's like, okay, you go to seminary, you study theology, you study history, you study all these things, which doesn't have a whole lot to do with what you're actually doing when you get to church. And then you're kind of, okay, here's my interests, here's my passions, here's all the things, and you get into a church, and it's almost like you're a little bit pigeonholed into a cookie cutter model, like starting out as a pastor. Okay, you're going to work with kids, you're going to be in the
Right.
children's ministry, even though I'm like, okay,
Right.
I have kids of my own, but it's not
Yeah.
necessarily my God-given strong suit to do well,
Yeah.
knowing how to minister
Yeah.
to children. And okay, here, put together a Sunday school curriculum and get everything ready
Right.
and find
Right.
volunteers, and all while
Right.
it's COVID and the church numbers are declining, and all
Right.
the anxiety of like, well, what's the future hold, and when church is collapsing and the money might not be there next year or
Yeah.
6 months from now. And so I walked away from that model because it just didn't feel. I just didn't feel like I was in my element at all in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yet, and yet, there's still that call, right? The counselor in me.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
living that out through my profession. It's a more secular kind of version of it. I would love to be able to kind of more talk more explicitly about faith and things like that in my counseling. But this is, like I said, why I started these things. I'm like, I gotta find expression for this other side of myself, whether it's having these kind of conversations, doing writing, working on a book, and so these multifaceted ways in which, yeah, I'm finding my own way. You know.
Right. Well, and you just said something that, well, I'll hear this later when I say it, because I really want to remember that what I'm about to say. What other profession does this to us? Like, to me, what you just described is exactly like the sort of like lived experience of what I'm trying to talk about a system that no longer works. What other job do you go into where you get all this training? Like, if you went out to school to be a therapist, when you get done, what do? You do therapy, right? If you
Mhm.
go to school to be a teacher, when you're done, what do? You teach. You go to school to be a priest, when you're done, what do? You do administration, right? You're like, and so wait a minute, that isn't actually, and people joke about this sometimes
Mhm.
bitterly. This, nobody taught us this in seminary. They should really teach us about like taxes in seminary, like how to be personnel. I'm like, no, they shouldn't, right? Like, no, it's the other way around, right? Ministry shouldn't be administration, right? And I will say that I think there's a place for administration and ministry, and I think there are people who are called to that. So I'm not saying that that's completely out of the board, but cookie cutter. And I was laughing so hard because also I did have to go through children's, and I didn't even like kids, right? I don't have kids of my own. I did inherit some kids, and I have a grandbaby, so I do. But, um, but you know why you have to do the children's ministry? It's because the head pastor doesn't want to, right? Because they hated it too, right? And so, but this idea that like we were formed to share the gospel, to reach people with the love of God,
Mm.
and then we get out of our formation, and then we don't do that anymore. Like, I actually literally had a conversation with somebody just a couple of days ago who he kind of was doing the whole like, well, kids these days, these people in seminary, they're like, well, I went to seminary to share the gospel, and now all I do is go to meetings. And he's like, well, that's what the job is, son. And I'm like, no, no, that's what's wrong, right? Don't we see that this is wrong? That maybe that's not the job. Maybe the job is to share the gospel, and the system has gotten calcified and ossified in such a way that our job becomes upholding the institution, not sharing the gospel. And and as you can see, that is one of my buttons, and I'm just like,
Mhm.
no, no, maybe those of us who are called to ministry were right all along. This is what we're called to, right? We
Hmm.
want to talk about God. We want to talk about why it matters that you
Amen.
believe in God. We want to talk about how much God loved you, right? Um, we want to hold your hand while you're dying. We want to lead worship and preach. We don't want to go to another budget meeting ever again as long as we live, right?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have to, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And we
like
don't want
I
to.
want to
Yeah,
preach. This is why I'm like
yeah,
I'm trying to find an expression for that, you know? Um
preach.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Do it.
I guess I'm wondering what challenges you might be anticipating, or like as I think about the possible challenges, right? Uh it, well, so on the one hand, there's the digital. So I know you mentioned that, okay, how do we imagine the future of the church together? That's one
Right,
piece I'm curious about, is
right.
how do we do this together rather than the kind of solopreneur term, right? Where everybody's
Preneur,
kind of
yeah.
doing their own.
Oop, I lost you there for a second.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, for a second you blipped, but you're back.
Okay. So how do we avoid that trap of like, okay, everyone's doing their own very individualistic thing, and how do we
Mhm,
do that really in community with each other? And I guess
mhm.
maybe another piece of that is just the, so if I could just briefly give expression to this as I'm trying to grow, like my Substack, my podcast. I've recently finished writing a book and kind of anticipating like, okay, if you want to maybe promote your book or sell your book, you need to have a following. And okay, so make videos, right? Post on Substack multiple times, however often, maybe make short form videos on TikTok or Instagram. And I'm like, okay, how much of this system, like, yes, it's fun and engaging, but it's like, okay, let's feed the algorithm. Let's spend more time on our screens. And there's some part of me
Right.
that's like, okay, is this really the direction that we want to be going in? Are we just kind of feeding into this thing that's being kind of created with social media and technology, and that is it part of the problem of how it, technology? Yes, it's this paradoxical thing where for example, I play video games with some of my friends. We try to once a week, and that's a blessing in a way. These are friends who we have a history, but they're not local, right? They don't. None of them
Mhm.
live in the state even that I live in. But I'm grateful for we have that point of connection through technology. And at the same
Right.
time, it's not quite the same as being in the flesh. And how many people, it's like this paradoxical thing where, like you and I, we're able to have this
Yeah.
conversation that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So I'm not discounting
Right.
that. But also,
Yeah.
where it's like, it feels sometimes like there's less embodiment happening. We're not touching grass
Yeah,
often
yeah,
enough.
yeah,
So I don't know. Those
yeah.
are kind of two things that come to mind. I don't know if you want to speak to
I
those.
started scribbling notes. So I heard you say like 6 things, I gotta be honest. I'm gonna work backwards.
Mhm.
Well, because I just wrote a blog post about this, but I will say that, I use my running group as an analogy because I think this is what my vision is, and I think this is how the world works today in ways that you just described in terms of like your online connections, our online connections, and also our in-person connections. So I belong to this running group. There's probably, well, so we have a chat. We have a chat. So we keep in touch, and there's probably 60 people on the chat. And every Saturday there's a run, and there's sometimes other runs, but like where's the run going to be? What's the route going to be? Everybody come, that kind of stuff. But we also cheer each other on when you do races and that sort of things. And we occasionally have social events, or there's life events for people, and we've gotten really close. I mean, I'm as close to my running group as I am to my church members. But what do together? We run, right? Like once a week, we run. But however, there's 60 people in the running group. There might be 10 people on the Saturday run. I mean, if there's 15, that's a lot, right? Like not everybody comes all the time. Some people never come. There's people in the running group that I don't know who they are, and I'm a regular, so it's very weird. And there's some people who were part of the run group and now they're no longer part of it. Maybe they're not even running anymore, but they stay on the run group chat for the camaraderie of it all. And we keep in touch that way. But it's the running that bonds us together, right? So it is the touching the grass, right? And so to me, I feel like, I mean, my vision is there's just like a plethora of small, intimate, in person worshiping or praying together communities, right? Like that's just what it is, right? And not all of those people have to have professional clergy, but that I also feel like the things that we offer in terms of ministry. So you write a book, right? So maybe a community forms of people who read your book together or talk about the principles of your book, right? And
Mm.
you're in touch with them. Maybe there's 100 of those small communities who are independent and read those books, and they're in touch with you through Substack or through other your website or something else, and you're around to help guide them, ground them, tie them to the Christian tradition, answer any questions, that sort of thing. But their community is forming in an in-person way, right? So that's part of what I see. Like both the like, yes, yes. Is there danger? 100%. Are there challenges? 100%. There's
Mm.
no question. But we're facing those dangers and those challenges regardless. And to just withdraw ourselves entirely, even though I'm very much into the monastic tradition, um, the monastics, when they did go off into the desert, they still kept in touch. They were still part of the church, and at least their abbot or their abbess was regularly meeting with spiritual directors, with the bishop, with some so that kind of thing. You can't. I don't think we can entirely divorce ourselves from that. So that's one part of that. I also feel like, yeah, like you can exhaust yourself. I mean, like being an online minister or being an entrepreneur can be just as entrapping as being the head of a nonprofit, right? Absolutely 100%.
Mhm.
And so part of that is what are you doing and why and who do you hope to reach and how. So part of that is like really defining what your ministry is and what you offer and who you're reaching and how you expect to make a living out of it if you do, that sort of thing. um I just forgot I was going to say something else. It was important. I'll remember in a second. Oh, and part of what I'm hoping for Substack Seminary, some of it is um like I'm going to be a part of it too. So part of it is this collaborative group. Like I have a lot of friends who have small businesses that are part of a affinity group, like a support group. Like they have breakfast together once a month to help each other, like to encourage each other and to give tips and advice. But they also collaborate. And so part of what I'm also thinking is like Lauren produces podcasts, right? Like I am pretty good at Substack, right? Like I feel like there's a place where there could be a very loose, confederation of ministers who help each other. One of the reasons that I put together Substack Seminary the way I did and am is that if you're part of, I know that on Substacks, for instance, collaboration gets you more attention and it gets people more followers, right? So
Mm.
how can we do this in a way that we are intentionally supporting everybody's ministry who is part of this, like being on each other's podcasts, like helping each other with their websites, with, those sorts of things. And, and who knows what's gonna like one of the people, Pastor Sierra Ward, who just came on as one of our sort of guest stars, she started her own denomination, which I just think is like the most ballsy thing in the world. So,
Yeah.
and incidentally, I want to join it. So so maybe, we help her, work out what that means. And then we become part of that new denomination, some of us, right? I don't know. So to me, that's part of like building the future of church together is also taking some of the burdens because, um, yeah, when I first started Free Range Priest, I said that, when you work for yourself, the great thing about working for yourself is you get to do everything yourself. And the terrible thing about working for yourself is you have to do everything yourself, right?
Right, right.
And so, um, and I mean, and even more in my mind, I am hoping the next kind of once I sort of start getting this launched, I'm actually going to start looking for people who want to sponsor the seminary, right? So ideally, I would like to be able to help either pay for ministers, sort of development of their own ministry, or of course, the people who are guest starring in the Substack Seminary pay them, right, to do this sort of guest starring. So that like Substack Seminary will become a place where people can like legitimately get supported, financially and ministerially for offering what they do, and also become just like a collaborative kind of collective of people. Um, the other thing it reminds me of, and I just had this thought, so breaking news right here on your news on your podcast. I went to the have you ever been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland?
No, never.
That was very cool. And I've been there several times, but the last time I was there, um, I f- it finally became clear to me that you go around and you see that like, Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks, then they did background for somebody else. Like basically, and especially when rock was new and wasn't really well respected, or they didn't get a lot of like contracts or whatever, they were like there was like a group of like what they were, like 100 people who were doing this and these different scenes. California was a big scene, Cleveland was a big scene, Detroit was like New York, and they all did backup for each other's albums. Like all of the big names, Jackson Brown, you just
Mm,
hear about anybody who was big in that day. Eric Clapton, they're on everybody else's album. In the 60s and the 70s, when rock and roll was new and it was just developing, all of these people helped each other out. They produced each other's albums, they sang backup, they wrote each other's songs, they sang each other's songs, that sort of thing. And then a movement was born. And I don't think that happens anymore, right? It was a really closed club, right, of people who were all on the same wavelength, and they did what they did and supported each other doing it. And so rock and roll.
mm.
There's a new analogy. So that's in my mind. Um, and I need to start saying that out loud more. This is the place where we can be to support one another, literally and spiritually, and hopefully financially, and that sort of thing, to make it easier for everybody, and not just give advice, which I think that's good too, and also help each other sort of like figure out stuff, but also literally make the burden lighter.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vision. I love it. I love your energy around it. It reminds me too of like I've always had a fantasy, a dream. Some of my people I've kind of admire as heroes have had this core group of people they collaborate with, whether it's like the Inklings with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, or I think
Yeah.
Thomas Merton was a part of that kind of thing, and Alan Watts, who I admire, was not, he's kind of was in groups like that as well, just almost think tank kind of things. So it's a beautiful
I,
vision. And as you are talking as well, though, one question kind of comes to mind that, we're living in extremely divided times, right? And everybody knows
yeah.
that. I think it's on everyone's mind. And I actually hadn't
Yeah.
thought of this question prior to coming into this conversation, but it's just hitting me now of, with Christian nationalism and everything that's going on between right and left, and all the divisiveness. And I think a lot of that too comes to like, what does it mean to be a Christian in this particular context?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have you thought about that as a challenge with Substack
No,
Seminary,
I
and
haven't thought about that at all.
and how do you deal
Yeah.
with that? Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts
Yeah.
are.
Thank you for that. Well, I will say that my other kind of big ministerial project besides Substack Seminary is Trexo, which is what I call a gym for your soul. So this idea of like, what if you could train your soul? What if you could use ancient spiritual practices to bring you closer to God? And part of the impetus of that came from running, but part of it came from the divided times that we live in now. And also this idea of so many people coming to me saying one of two things. One, they've sat in the pews forever and they still don't feel any closer to God. They still don't know how to pray. They still don't feel like they know their Bible. They still just feel like they're lacking a
Mm,
relationship with God, or the relationship to God that they want. And honestly, my husband is one of them. Talk about this all the time. Jeff and I met at church, but he doesn't go to church anymore. He goes to my church sometimes, but it's 45 minutes away. But because every time he wanted something deeper and wanted to learn to be a disciple better, people invite him to be on the vestry or the church board or the finance committee. And he was like, that's not what I want. I'm looking for God, right? And then
mm,
the other part is people who are new to Christianity, who are utterly overwhelmed with what does it mean to be a Christian, right? Like there's all these different flavors of Christians, and there's this and that, and we believe this, and these people are bad, or those people are bad, or we can't do this, and we have to do that. and it's utterly confusing and often contradictory. So one of the impetuses that I had to just start developing Trexo was to go all the way back to the beginning. How did the first Christians do it? Right? How did the people who knew the people who knew the people who knew Jesus order their lives, right? We have these things in common, right? And this is what you can learn, right? And it's not learning about Christianity, it is learning to be a Christian. What do Christians do? Christians pray, Christians worship, Christians hope, Christians live their lives with joy, right? And so Christians read the Bible, right? Like the actions that the first Christians took. They did not sit around and debate, even though they had huge we know they had huge divisions from day one. There was not a single day that the disciples agreed on stuff, right? And they were constantly angry. Peter and Paul, the whole like, do you have to be Jewish before you can be Christian? We don't think of that as a huge deal, but the first disciples, huge deal,
Right.
huge deal. Not to mention that Jesus ate with sinners and tax collectors, and people don't like that either, right? And so, you're doing it wrong, I like to say, is like one of the very first things we learn to say as Christians, right? And we're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. And so to get back to the basics, right? Basically, before the church, when the church was the church, right? Like all the way back to the beginning, to the extent that we can, using the Bible and other sources, and also then our own actions and practices. So that's sort of another, not that they're not all related, but to me, I feel like I'm not really worried about that particular challenge in Substack Seminary, because I think people are going to come from all different backgrounds, and that's okay. To me, um, part of it is the focus of what makes your ministry a ministry. So Q3 is going to be theology, right? So I also wrote about this recently. Somebody who was talking about how they have a pet ministry. Well, their pet ministry is about like resources about adoption. And I'm just like, okay, that's all well and good, but that's not ministry, right? Like to me, if it's ministry, if it is somehow bearing the sacraments, the scriptures, and the tradition of the Christian faith into the world, right? So how are you doing that, right? And so to me, it's going to help. The idea is to help people clarify how what they do is ministry. And I honestly think, and maybe this is just Pollyanna-ish of me, that those of us who are on like very different extremes of what Christianity, how Christianity and sort of social issues or political issues intersect, if we can articulate how it is that we believe we are sharing the gospel, then I think we're going to have a framework in which um, we can hear each other better and engage with each other better, because I firmly believe that, right? That like people get upset because they say you're not doing it right? Like what you're doing is not Christianity. And so to me, I would like the focus to be on how is what I am doing Christianity.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot. I'm an Episcopalian. A lot of my clergy Episcopalian friends are very much on the left side of the political spectrum.
Mhm.
And I try to be nowhere on the political spectrum, to be totally honest with you. And but when I speak with them and they're really upset about something, I'm often like, well, so how how is what you're doing Christian ministry, right? So, and that's really hard because it's like I am outraged at other people, right? And so let's bring that into our faith, right? Like, so what do I do with my outrage, right? How do I? And so aren't we called to help people? Yes. But railing at other people who aren't doing the thing is not helping people. It isn't. Right. It's not actually serving the poor. It is railing at other people for not serving the poor, which, so that sort of thing. So I think that there are ways that we can all, I mean, we're always all um, sinners, right? We're always all in need of salvation. We're always all wrong, I like to say. When push comes to shove, none of us is God, right? But if we can get to the place where we're saying, this is how I see myself sharing the gospel, I think we'll at least be in a better place. And at least it will. I always like to say that the reason that I try as hard as I can not to have political opinions is because I believe in something that's so much bigger than all of our politics, right? Like Christianity is too large and too important to be divided up politically, right? It's always been about what we all have in common, not the things that divide us.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonate with the idea of like, trying to bridge that divide, trying to I think the people I admire and I think Jesus himself, right, was really trying to not demonize not other
Yeah.
people, and to where, I can't remember, somebody once said, it stuck with me, it's like wherever you draw a line in the sand, Jesus is standing on the other side. It's like waiting
I
for you
love
to come
that.
over,
Right.
so yeah, I believe in that. And at the same time, right, I also think that there is something almost inherently political, or like, that there were political actions and things that Jesus did, but that's just
Right.
my take on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
even to, stand up for the poor and the marginalized can be a political act. That, the crucifixion was a, right, it was
Right.
a
Right. Although
execution
I
reserved for political dissidents and that kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Right. Although I got into this a little bit on Substack with somebody because I would claim that the crucifixion was the ultimate theological act. It was the ultimate act that rose above and nullified politics, right? Yes, Jesus was caught up in the political times, but what he did by allowing himself basically to be crucified and then rising from the dead blew that out of the water. So to me, it's just another powerful sign that theology, and especially Christian theology, and especially resurrection, upends anything that we think about in terms of politics. But
Mm.
again, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're
Well,
all going to disagree. I mean, there's no way in my mind that I think that people are gonna. But I would say, in terms of Substack Seminary, that's not the point. Um, in talking with Sarah Ward yesterday, I realized like one of the things that we are going to do is have a covenant that everyone's going to be part of, both to care for one another and to support one another, but also a behavioral covenant, right? Like, we are
mm,
all here in ministry. And so, we are all going to treat each other's as brothers and sisters, that sort of thing. And so there's always place for disagreement or a discernment, that sort of thing, but not space for you know hatefulness or abuse.
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's, who knows, right? I mean, maybe that'll be one thing that, if it can contribute to healing or bridging the divide that exists, which is such a needed thing now. And who knows if
Mhm.
it'll do that or not, but
Yeah.
I pray that it does, right?
I pray that it does too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like a lot of potential for a lot of fruitful things. I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
engaging in this work and offering this to people. It sounds like you're doing great work, and so
Thank
thank you
you.
for that.
And so are you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm glad our paths crossed. We are, I
Yeah.
guess, about at the probably end of our time. I think it's probably a good place to
Yeah.
stop. What do you think?
I think so too. You've let me ramble on quite a bit. So thank you very much for
No, it's
that.
good. It's inspiring. It's fascinating. Like I said, I think you have a great energy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we say goodbye, anything you want listeners to know? I mean, obviously, check Cathie out on Substack Seminary, all the things.
Yes.
But any
Substack
other,
Seminary,
yeah,
free
anything
range
else you want
breeds,
to?
come see me.
Yeah.
No, I just like what do I want people to know? I think I've said everything that I want people to know.
Shit's fair. Okay.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm excited about I just feel like there is this energy. I mean, I'm excited about my own ministry, but I just feel like we are living in this time where I do feel this sort of energy for people want to be closer to God, right? They want a
Mm,
renewed spiritual life. And I have experienced it personally, and I have so many people in ministry who have experienced this, or people coming to them wanting help to, become a Christian, give their lives to Christ, get closer to God, learn more about Christianity. And I don't know what that is, but I feel like it's if you're listening,
yeah.
let this be your sign, right? This is a great time to learn more about your own spiritual journey and your own relationship with God and with the church.
Yeah. Amen. And it's yeah, I do think there is a hunger. I felt this for a long time now for experience, to experience the Spirit, to experience God, to experience community. And I think I want, we could, we won't go too deeply into that now, but it's just like maybe
Yeah,
it comes out of that hunger we were talking about, that, the culture, what it worships, what it values now, just kind
yeah,
of more shallow things, money and fame and
yeah,
celebrity and
yeah,
likes and views and all that. So, well, I think it's
yeah,
needed to there needs to be a deeper, more meaningful story and thing to participate in and to be connected to, namely,
yeah.
God and one another. So yeah, so thanks for a great conversation, Cathie. I really
Thank
enjoyed it. I
you.
will link to all the things in the show notes here so people will know where to find you. And
Thank you.
yeah, we'll be in touch. Maybe I'll join the seminary. We'll see.
I would love that. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
All right. Bye.